it's just Martine, and today we're going to be talking about everything to do with my reading year in 2023. I have some fun stats to share with you, a couple fun graphs. I'm going to do a little bitty quick book bracket. The book bracket I'm using was created and designed by Ruby over at Ruby Red. So let's jump straight into it because we have a lot to go over today, and I already tried to film this video once and then had to relocate because too much was happening. Here we are, I'm sitting in a little beanbag and we're gonna get right to it. So my reading year for 2023 was what the stats would call my most successful reading year ever. I read more books than I've ever read in a year since tracking it in 2017. I read more pages than I've read in a year. I don't define success in that way. I think as long as I'm having a good time reading, that doesn't even mean I need to be reading only 5-star books. I just mean like I'm having a good time, going with the flow, enjoying myself, not putting too much pressure on my reading. As long as that is the case, I consider it to be a successful reading year. The numbers don't really matter to me in that same way. I mean, every year I set my Goodreads goal at 52 books, regardless of what I end up doing. For me, reading is just fun, and I do make content out of it, but I try not to lose sight of the fact that both reading and video making are just hobbies for me. They're supposed to be a good time. So when you hear my numbers, some of you are going to be like, that's not a realistic amount to read in a year. You're totally right. I mean, not only is this the most that I read, but this was also like the most time I've ever had to read, I would say, in a year. I'm at grad school, and grad school is busy, but I like to have a nice work-life balance when it comes to my grad school experience, and I don't have a ton of friends here, and I don't have a ton of other activities that I do. So when I'm not working, I'm usually reading. I don't know how to stress that enough. So yes, it's unrealistic to read this much in a year when you have a life, but I simply do not. For some little overall count things, I will say I completed 408 books this year for a total of 130,007 pages. And according to Bookly, I spent 1,313 hours reading, which if you divided it by 24, because there are 24 hours in a day, is 54.7083. Basically, if you look at a year which has 52 weeks in it, you would notice that's a little more than one day every week that I would completely dedicate to reading, which is bonkers, but just how it is. My first graph here is books read. You can see it's generally steady except for in June when Wonderathon happened, because that was the craziest readathon experience I think I've ever had. And so I read 74 books that month, but generally I was reading about 30 books a month, with my lowest month being 21 books in October. If you've seen my monthly stats videos, which if you like this, then I highly recommend checking them out, you'd know that's pretty normal for me. The abnormal part was June, and I'm fully owning that. The good news is, even though I did read a lot of short books for Wonderathon in June, driving up that 74 book total, I also read a lot of pages, to be fair. So when you look at my pages read, it basically mimics the last graph, where the most pages I read was in June. The lowest number of pages I read was in October. So I'm pleased about that. And kind of an overall stat when you look at pages that I think is of interest is that my average pages per book was 319. I kind of wanted to keep it over 300 pages for the average pages per book, so 319 I can totally live with. I'm proud of that. Let's go. I read from a total of 15 genres this year. My biggest genre of the year was mystery, with about 14% of my reads. What's interesting to me about that is I feel like I don't read mystery that often, yet month after month it was like my top genre, and then also it is a higher percentage than my adventure books for the year. And there are only two things that I counted as adventure books this year. I counted every Magic Tree House book I read this year for the Magic Tree House read along as an adventure book. I also counted every Series of Unfortunate Events book. Between those two things, I expected that to be my biggest genre of the year because I average 3 Magic Tree House books a month, but no, mystery it was. Some other big categories for me were contemporary, nonfiction, romance, sci-fi, and fantasy. Some of those are normal, some are like, I guess normal. I do read a lot of fantasy, even though it's not my favorite. I do give pretty much everything a try. Other small categories range anywhere from like horror and thriller to classics. I read 11 classics, that's pretty good. Magical realism, poetry, historical fiction, all those things. So a total of 15 genres. But I think what's interesting to think about here is, of those genres, which one gave me the most delight? According to my spreadsheet, the genre with the most 5 stars this year was contemporary. So Thank you to my 12.3% contemporary for having the most 5 stars in it. Absolutely delivering. For book size, about halfway through the year, so right after Wonderathon, I made this decision that I would really love no more than 50% of my books were small books in 2023. And so I worked really hard on that percentage, and I'm happy to report that only 42.9% of my books were small. Small is anything under 300 pages in my spreadsheet. The majority of the books I read were medium, which is between 300 and 500 pages. That was 48.5% of them. 7.1% large, which is between 500 and 700 pages, which is really good. And then 6 chunky books, and a chunky book is anything over 700 pages. And so basically every 2 months I managed to read a book over 700 pages, which I'm thoroughly pleased with. For publication date, we have majority backlist. And this is not surprising for a number of reasons. One, I don't buy a ton of new books, but also if you think about the history of mankind, significantly more books were written and published before 2 years ago than in the past 2 years. So of course my 2022 and 2023 reads are going to be less than my backlist because backlist has so many more to choose from. So yeah, 70.3% backlist, 15.9% from 2022, and 13.7% from 2023. Format read, I'm a big ebook girly, 46.1%. 32.4% of my books were physical, that's either physical library books or physical owned books, and then 20.8% were audiobooks. 0.7% were mixed media, where, and this is my favorite saying, I used my eyeballs and my earballs at the same time, so that was only 3 books. For format acquired, I'm a library girly. I don't know if you knew this. I actually had somebody ask me the other day, how can you afford to read so many books in a year? And I looked at them and I said, because I don't pay for them, I use my library. So 61.3% of my reads from 2023 were from the library, either physical from my school library or Libby, audiobooks, ebooks, all of it. I do have a pretty large collection of owned physical books though, so it's important to me that I'm still getting around to reading those. I read 22.8% of my books as physical owned books. That was 93 of them. I would have loved it to be up to 100, but it doesn't really matter to me as long as I'm making progress on them instead of just like letting them sit there while I exclusively read library books. I read some NetGalley books, some owned ebooks. 5.1% of them were books that were in the other category. This is usually I borrowed it from somebody else or something like that. I did have Kindle Unlimited for like 1 month, so I read 3 books in that. For my star rating, I will say my average rating for the year ended up being like a 3.6. So as you can see, most of my reads were 3 stars and above. I'm so pleased with that. A 3-star book is a book I enjoy. I did have 31 5-star reads for 7.6 of my reads. So I gave plenty of 5 stars, also not as many as I could have, you know? For series versus standalone, it's almost split right down the middle with a slight majority going to standalone at like 55%. I did make some great progress in series this year. Now, my spreadsheet does not properly count the way that I DNF series, so it is so common for me, more common than not actually, to read the first book in a series and then never plan on continuing that series, because I just read what I have available. I'll read any book one time, but then if I don't really like the book, then I'm not going to continue the series. So I did start 79 series. Majority of those I don't plan to continue. I did track DNFs, but not in this dashboard that I'm looking at. I did finish 20 series and catch up on 11 of them, so could be worse. My author gender graph, I honestly think this is like the least interesting of them right now. Slight majority female authors, kind of a mix though. For age range, the majority of books I read were for an adult audience at 57.1%. YA and children's were almost equal. Both of them were 21%, but children's was 21.6% and YA is 21.3%. In spite of my epic proportions of Magic Tree House, I still read way more adult books, which I'm pleased about. And then just some fun other things to say is 52.57% of my reads explicitly had some kind of representation in them, whether it was like racial representation, mental health representation, neurodivergent representation, queer representation. If it was intentionally there, I tried to remember to count it. It's a little over half. Could be better, could be worse. And 59.41% of the books I read were from authors that were new to me. Those are the stats. Let's get into making this book bracket. Okay, I took the liberty of writing down the names of all of my 5 stars of the year before I started making this video. I marked which month they were from. Some months I had to choose a winner for the month. I went ahead and did that off camera. Some months I only read 1 5-star, so it just automatically progress. But we're gonna sit here with my little journal and we're gonna go through this book bracket real quick. So again, this is made by Ruby over at Ruby Red. Go show her some love. The months are kind of like spread around so that like January is not going against February initially and stuff, which is cool because then different parts of your reading year are battling each other instead of it being chronological, which I really like. So we're going to start in like, I guess, this bottom corner right here, January and May. So for January, my 5-star pick was Rage of Innocence by Kristen Henning. And in May, my 5-star pick was Room by, I think, Emma Donoghue. It's interesting because both of those I loved because of what I study. But regardless, out of those two, it's really hard to pick. Rage of Innocence is just so well done as a nonfiction book. I think my heart has to go to fiction this year. Like, I don't think a nonfiction book is going to win no matter how good it is because my heart I just love fiction so much, so I'm going to move Room along. I said I'd make it speedy and now I'm slowing down. Right here, we have October versus March. In October, my 5-star pick was Tumbleweeds, which was a Dollar Tree book, and in March, it was First Meetings in the Enderverse, which was a 5-star prediction for me. Because of that, I was expecting good things in First Meetings in the Enderverse, but I was not expecting to love Tumbleweeds, so I think that one's moving on. We'll go the first round, all of them, and then we'll move in the bracket. So moving on to December and June. For December, my 5-star pick was The Ensemble, and for June, it was Answers in the Pages by David Levithan. This one's really hard because like one about book banning and versus one about music, two of my passions. I think I'm going to tell you straight up that this is a bit of a biased answer, that I'm going to pick The Ensemble because I read it more recently and I don't know, again, that was the more surprising one to love. Also, Answers in the Pages already got a huge shout out this year in my mid-year book freakout tag. I said it was my favorite book that I'd read so far. Truly only something from the end of the year could really usurp that. It was still an excellent book I recommend. For November, my pick was Wool. That was one of those months where there was just one. And then in August, I picked Little Bee. And out of those, I think I'm going with Wool. For September, my pick was My Fair Brady, which actually comes out this month, fun fact. And then my April pick was The Atlas 6, which was surprising, but I think I'm going to go with My Fair Brady because I still think about that book sometimes, and I highly recommend you look into it, especially if you love reading about theater and you love YA contemporaries, queer YA contemporaries, look into it. For my July pick, I picked Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare, and for my February pick, it was The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. Out of those two, I'm going with Chain of Iron, just because that one stands out more in my memory than The Cheat Sheet does. Now we're going back around. Going for the next round, we have Room versus Tumbleweeds. And I think I'm gonna go with Tumbleweeds because as excellently done as Room was, Tumbleweeds had me gasping. It was just so dramatic. I loved it. I don't know. Oh geez. Next we have The Ensemble versus Wool, and I think I have to pick The Ensemble just because I keep wanting to rave about it, and I've talked about Wool maybe once. And then for My Fair Brady versus Chain of Iron, I'm going with My Fair Brady. Just what my gut says. Since we're doing a fast book bracket, I'm going with what my gut is telling me. And so in the end, we have Tumbleweeds versus The Ensemble versus My Fair Brady. So we have two lit fics and a YA contemporary. And there's just something in my soul that says it has to be The Ensemble. That's my favorite book from 2023. I'm calling it. I feel like if that beat out Answers in the Pages, which was my favorite book of the start of the year, it's gotta go all the way. So guys, gals, non-binary pals, The Ensemble was my favorite book of the year. And with that, this 2023 reading review has come to an end. So if you liked it, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below. Have you read any of the books that were on my best books of 2023 book brackets? And subscribe for more reading, writing, and college lifestyle content. Until next time, bye humans, bye!